Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Communication 24/7 podcast, where we communicate about how we communicate. I am your host, Jennifer Furlong. Today, I wanted to take a little different trajectory from the normal communicating about how we communicating, and I wanted to get into some of the specifics of the vocal aspect of communication. Whenever we talk about the different channels through which we communicate, we talk about nonverbals, and of course, we talk about words and how the words we choose to use are, of course, very important, whether we're in a conversation or we're doing a public speech, a presentation, whatever it is, a podcast like this one. But a huge part of the delivery of the words is it's not just what we say, but it is how we say it. So I wanted to bring in an expert to talk to us about that vocal production and what kind of a difference it does make. How does it impact our ability to communicate and the listener's ability to be able to want to continue to listen to what it is that we are trying to communicate? So welcome. I am so happy, Susan. I am excited that you are here because I have a lot of questions. And I know if anybody's watching, they're going to have a lot of questions about this topic. But yes, I have Susan Murphy with me. I'm going to do an intro really quick, and then I'm going to ask Susan to add on to that intro because I know that there's a whole lot that we're missing in this quick paragraph that I'm going to just read very quickly to just acclimate all the listeners to who it is that we have in the studio today. So Susan, she is a vocal coach for TV reporters as well as anchors. And she's been in the broadcast industry for over 40 years. So she knows what she is talking about. So listen up. She's been a radio news director, a television news reporter, and a quote, weather girl, back when we used to call them that, right?
Yep.
She's been a talk show host, a producer for radio, a public television producer, an on-air personality, a college dean and an instructor, a voiceover artist, which is something else that I want to pick her brain about, and now a broadcast voice coach. Welcome, Susan. So happy to have you.
It's delightful to be here, Jennifer. Thanks for having me on the show. I love to talk about what I do and to pass along some great tips and strategies for anyone who's looking to sort of up their vocal game.
Okay, so I will now practice my non-regional diction.
No. Don't do that. You're fine. No. See, I do sometimes make hosts very aware of how they speak. That lasts for like less than 30 seconds, and then you'll become you again, and you're fine.
Yeah. So that is the point, right? And, that's going to bring me to my first question. How did you get into the industry, and how did you make the decision to specifically focus on the vocal coaching aspect of it?
So how did I become a voice coach for anchors and reporters?
Yeah.
That was something that I actually no, it's been in the back of my head for a long time, but it was last summer when I was thinking about starting this business, and I was talking with a friend over lunch, and she was thinking of starting a business, but in a different area, and we were just trying to give each other some courage to do it. And she said, well, one of the things I heard was that if you want to do this, you really have to have a very strong point of view about something. Oh, well, that light bulb went off. I have a very strong point of view about how I believe anchors and reporters and most people in general should use their authentic voices as a way of communicating effectively. So I came up with some rough ideas, ran them past a news director friend of mine who thought it was a good idea. He said, yeah, I can think of a lot of people who would use this. He sent me some reporters to work with. I did it for free, and he did a recommendation. And in the last year, I've had about 60 clients who come to me either on their own or through news directors, where I work to build a more authentic voice and delivery and presence on air. And sometimes in life too. For some people, it's not just an on-air thing. it's a life thing. We can get into that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's going to be one of the things that I would like to focus on throughout this conversation. So, you've been in the industry for over 40 years. What was your experience before you got into the television and radio industry? Did you have any formal training to get into it, or was it just it just so happened that you got lucky with a position that was open at the local, weather station? How did that start for you?
It started when I was 14 and I did my first radio commercial, and they paid me to talk. And I thought, this is cool. All right, we can do this. So I was a communications major in college at Temple University, graduating in the late 70s, standing on the shoulders of the original wave of early women broadcasters, such as Jane Pauley, such as Barbara Walters. And at the time, TV stations were clamoring to add women to their staffs. So
Mhm.
finding a job on television in the late 70s with a communications degree was not hard.
Mm.
Um, my my resume reel was average for a college student, but I did get my first job in West Palm Beach, Florida. Stayed about a year and decided I really hated television because all they cared about was how your hair looked. But that is where I got to be a weather girl for a little while.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, that was a hoot and a half. Now, of course, you can't do that because you need a meteorological degree and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But I went back to radio, which is my first love, and came up through news radio, which again is my
Mhm,
first love. And it has wended its way through there. I like to say you can't shoot at a moving target. So I've always been open to new ideas. I've always been open to cobbling together
mhm,
um, different jobs, which is kind of how I've made my way through the industry and how I've managed to work with a lot of people and discover a lot of things and see where my strengths are.
mhm,
And now what I do is I just pass along everything I've learned through broadcast, but also through taking singing lessons. I did that about 25 years ago. I was cast in a show. I love to do regional theater. I lived on Long Island at the time and was cast in Footloose as one of the
Oh,
mothers. And the mothers have a duet. And I'm great in the chorus and sure, throw me some lines. Yeah.
wow.
Wait, you want me to sing a duet? And you want it to be the alto part. I'm not even singing the melody. Okay. So I quick found a wonderful voice teacher from whom I learned so much that I also blend into what I teach broadcasters, because what I've learned as a singer blends so well with what broadcasters can do, because we are performers to some degree,
Mhm,
but there's a very fine balance between performance and authenticity, between
mhm,
performance and storytelling, between performance and connecting to your audience. So all of that combined with, I also teach some broadcast writing skills, which
mhm.
augment the voice skills. That's what works to elevate a reporter's voice and then therefore gets him or her into her next bigger job.
I really appreciate that you said that regarding the blending of the experiences with what you've experienced on stage, um, into what you understand about what makes effective communication, right?
Right.
Being able to be yourself, but in a way, we're a more polished version of ourselves. Because I know from personal experience, having worked with different colleges, teaching communication classes in different colleges. Sometimes you'll have somebody come in to teach a public speaking class, for example, and their entire background is in theater. And which is great because, like you said, there is a bit of a performance
Mhm.
aspect of that. So, not to take away from anybody who has a pure theater performance background, but for me, coming from a communication background, I was also a major in communication. My concern has always been, okay, let's blend the two because, yes, there is an element of performance to this. We do want to polish it. However, the message is what's the most important thing. So let's make sure that we can deliver the message in a way that the audience is going to be able to understand and appreciate it, all of those things.
Sure.
And I think it's a good blend.
Doesn't basic communication, basic rhetoric teach you
Mhm.
that between communicator and communicatee, if there is a problem, if there is a disconnect, it's on the communicator's side.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
not usually on the communicatee side.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And sometimes I do feel if you take too much of the performance aspect of it, where I'm going to deliver this speech at the audience versus I have something important to say, I'm going to deliver my presentation and at the same time I'm going to pay attention to the audience because if I'm saying something that they're not getting, I need to pay attention to that feedback so that maybe I can make some adjustments,
Right.
take a step back
Right.
and so I think that sometimes is the element that could be missing. So I so appreciate that you are blending your
Mhm.
experiences with theater and communication and the whole thing. Um, One of the things that we talked about before we actually started the recording today was how the media space itself is just becoming so augmented with other types of media. For example, this podcast. So there are how many millions of podcasts in existence now? Hundreds of
4, I
thousands
think,
of them,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
4,000,000, I think I read
Yeah,
recently.
it's
Mhm.
it yeah, it's just an incredible amount of podcasts. Now, that's not to say that all of them are active at the moment. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they said something about the actual number of active podcasts out of all of the millions, the ones that have released an episode within the past 6 months. So
You and
we
I read the
consider that
same
to
article.
be
I know where
active.
you're going with this. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's only what, like 400,000 or something like
Correct.
that.
Right.
Yeah. So, do you think the delivery aspect of that? I wanted to just, the reason I wanted to have this conversation about podcasting is so many people are wanting to get into the industry.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, and I know they're curious, what is your opinion about the level of polish that needs to happen or should happen? Since you've been in the radio industry and the television industry, what are your thoughts on this new space and whether or not there should be any level of polishing that happens for anyone who's interested in getting into it?
Well, one of the beautiful things about podcasting is it's not broadcasting. It's
Mhm,
not over airwaves that are subject to government rules and regulations.
mhm,
It's not an area where you are necessarily going to be paid. You can do this because you simply love it. You can
mhm,
do this because you simply have, going back to what I learned about, you have a very strong point of view about something. So you're going to
mhm,
host a podcast. And it
mhm.
doesn't take a whole lot now to set up a home studio. It's
Yep.
way easier. As a voice actor, we now compete with anybody who has a microphone in their house, more or less. So the playing field, that horrible expression, the playing field has evened out somewhat. That is
Mhm,
very
mhm,
true with regard to people who want to broadly cast their points
mhm,
of view, broadly cast their conversations, broadly cast or share information or opinion.
mhm,
And a lot of people don't think that polish is necessary because they have all the other things that they
mhm,
don't necessarily have to pay attention to how their voice sounds or how quickly they're speaking or how they are interviewing a guest or how they are tangentially running off onto down various rabbit
mhm,
holes when you started with one particular sentence. So I appreciate that about podcasts and how it has allowed more people to become part of the conversation.
mhm,
But I'm someone who is very keen on listening to conversation and gaining something from it, learning something from it. But if I find it annoying, if I find it too quick, if I find it distracting, if I find it the audio is all off or it's distant or it's there are things going on in the background of that audio,
mhm.
I can't listen.
Mhm.
So, that's not to say the average person can't, maybe they can,
Mhm.
but I'm sort of a big fan of doing the best you can with regard to putting your podcast together with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and, I'm a
Right.
big fan of when you're giving a speech, to really be very strong in your open and very strong in your close. So, are those the things that I listen for? Sure. Have I
Mhm.
turned off podcasts because I've been distracted or don't care for the tone of voice? Sure. We all have,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
But I don't it's not a criteria anymore,
Mhm.
whereas it
Mhm.
is still on television and radio.
Right, right. When you work with the professionals in the field, the actual broadcasters, the anchors, do you get into the realm of how to conduct an interview effectively? Because I know I'm a member of a whole bunch of different podcast groups, and we all get together. We're talking about what it is to be a podcaster, and we like to dissect the most, the most popular podcasts and try to emulate, I guess, as best as we can. To have that little bit. We just want a little bit of piece of that pie,
Sure.
but, from the professional point of view, one question that constantly comes up in these groups that I'm in is, how do I conduct an interview effectively? So is just from your experience working so closely, within the industry itself, do you get into that aspect of it as well, or do you just strictly focus on the production of the vocals themselves?
N m 85% of the time, it's the production of
Mhm.
the vocals
Mhm. Mhm.
themselves. But we do occasionally get into interviewing skills.
Mhm.
One of the things that I'm learning with young broadcasters coming out of programs and J schools and whatever
Mhm.
is that technologically, they're very good.
Mm.
And so they can put that microphone in front of people or use their iPhones or whatever to get
Yeah.
lots of conversation from people. And
Mhm.
the flip side of that is when I was a reporter 35 years ago, sometimes it was harder to get people to talk to you. People mistrusted the media or well, people still mistrust the media. That's a whole
Yeah.
nother story. That's yeah,
Right.
okay. But people are more willing now to talk to you because they know that you're gonna put them on TV or you're gonna put them in a podcast. So
Mm.
they're more than willing to share with you. So in a sense, that has become easier. But what I often like to talk to reporters about is making sure that the information they cull from an interview is information that is put out to their audience in a way that they can easily understand it the first time they hear it.
Mm.
So I will advise when you're speaking with an engineer, a doctor, a scientist, sometimes a politician who just puts lots of fancy words around their answers. My question is often, well, oh, okay, well, thank you for that. But um, if you were to answer that question for a group of sixth graders, I think my audience would appreciate a simpler answer. So, how would you answer that question for sixth graders? And then they'll do it again. A, you will understand it better, and B, so will your audience. But the key to any good interview is listening. You can
Mhm.
do all the research you want on the person who you're talking to. And in that research, you are going to uncover an awful lot, and you're going to probably ask questions that they've been asked multiple times. And that's
Mhm.
fine. But if you really listen to what their answers are, and then you can take it in a different direction. For example, I was doing a radio show years and years, 30 years ago, where I was interviewing, and I don't remember her name. She was on the Bob Newhart show back in the
Mm.
80s, and we got to talking about her career, and she said that she had actually started out, as a weather person at a TV station, and I believe it was in Minnesota or something. I said, "Oh," so then we could talk about our experiences as weathercasters, weather
Right.
girls,
Yeah.
and I that was an area of conversation she probably doesn't have with a lot of people because she doesn't usually talk with other weathercasters. So
Right.
that was a fun little thing. Or sometimes even asking the offbeat question, like, if you hadn't become a voice teacher, what would you have liked to have been? And that can
Right.
start you
Yeah.
down a road. So it's listening. And then I think for me over the years, having a list of offbeat questions.
Mm, mm.
Because, back in the day, when we didn't have the internet, you couldn't find everything out about a particular person. Now you can. So let's not stick with the obvious. Let's
Right.
go to the unobvious, the
Yeah.
obscure.
Yeah. Right. And I think that's what makes the conversations so interesting to go down those, little rabbit holes. And like you said, oh, you were in weather too. How cool is that? We have something
Mhm.
in common. So let's
Mhm.
explore that.
Mhm.
Um, let's switch gears just for a bit because you are a vocal coach. So while I have you here, I do want to take advantage as much as I can to learn as much as I can from
Sure.
you. Being a vocal coach, and anyone who is listening to this currently or even later on, we are doing a live stream on Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as YouTube. So I want to remind you that you're more than welcome to ask questions, make
Yes.
comments,
Yes.
so it helps create this type of synergy in these types of conversations. So don't be shy, ask your
Mm-mm.
questions if you're curious about something. And then later on, after the live stream has ended, please still feel free to make comments and ask questions
Yeah,
because I'll go back in later and check. And if there's a question that I can't answer, I will contact Susan and
you got it.
and we'll
Absolutely.
continue to pick her
Sure.
brain. Um, so when you work with these vocal coaches, and I'm thinking about because I know you work with professional broadcasters, but I would also like to be able to um, understand how to apply some of these lessons to anyone
Sure.
who might potentially be in the podcasting space, or anyone who is thinking about they would like to do a TED talk, or a TEDx
Mhm.
talk, and they want to be able to have a more polished type of presentation. So take me to the basics. When you meet with someone for the very first time, what are some of the things that you are looking for? How do you determine what you need to focus on in order to help them become a more polished broadcaster or, vocal artist?
I will have seen some of their work as a reporter or an anchor, so I have an idea of what
Mhm.
I'm working with. You had mentioned this as anybody who wants to get into some sort of professional speaking arena, but
Mhm.
all these tips are for anybody who speaks. And that's all
Yes.
of us. We
Yes.
communicate with bosses, we communicate with spouses, we communicate with children.
Mhm.
So all these tips can benefit you in any arena in which you apply them. So everyone I work with, I always start with breath work
Mhm.
because the root or the seat of your most authentic voice starts with your breath. And it starts with where you are breathing from, which needs to be the bottom of your diaphragm. Babies are born doing that. Somewhere along the 4, 5, and 6 ages, when we're walking and talking and learning to follow directions, we lose the ability to always breathe from our belly. We breathe from here, very shallow breath. Oh, yeah, the air and oxygen get into our lungs and we oxygenate our blood. And yeah, that all happens. But when we learn to speak authentically from our belly as often as we can, it always starts with breath work, which is a combination of yogic breathing. Anybody who's attended a yoga class knows a little bit about this, plus
Mhm.
what I've learned from singing coaches, and then what I've learned being behind a microphone all these years, little tips and tricks to, help you extend breath or take half a breath or whatever. But the bottom line is breath and posture. So I
Mhm.
start with breath and posture. But one really quick tip that I can give anybody and everybody for making sure you are breathing from the bottom of your diaphragm has to do with a part of your body that has more to do with your voice than I had any idea. When I learned this 25 years ago, it was revelatory and mind-blowing. And that part of your body is your shoulders. Your shoulders have more to do with the quality of your voice than you know. So if you take nothing away from this little example, think shoulders, lower them, drop them, make your shoulders heavy. Because where do we carry tension and stress? Hello?
Yep.
So when we're stressed here, it automatically goes into your neck and up into your jaw to the muscles of your face. Pretty soon you're breathing very shallowly and the pitch of your voice is rising and you're not really using your diaphragm to breathe. And here's where we're talking.
Yeah.
You lower your
And it
shoulders.
sounds,
you can hear it immediately.
Sounds a little desperate. Yeah.
It sounds desperate. Exactly. That's a good word. I've never used that before. Okay, thank you, Jennifer. I'm stealing that. Desperate. Sounds desperate. Yes. We don't need to sound desperate.
No.
So when we breathe in the air, and as speakers, it's in through our mouths and out through our mouths. First of all, we respirate more than the average person, so we always have to be drinking water. And when you are speaking from your belly, taking in that air, usually I would say to practice it, it's in on 4 and out on 6. And the reason I do out on 6 is to make sure you are really, really, really exhaling all that air, something we almost never do in everyday life and conversation. That sends a signal to your brain for a broadcaster that you know how to exhale all that air. So your brain will not send you the signal that says, hey, you're running out of air here. That's not going to happen. Yogic breathing also activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which runs alongside your regular nervous system. And the parasympathetic nervous system works to offset all the chemicals and hormones that are released throughout your body from your regular nervous system, such as cortisol and adrenaline, the things that make you nervous in front of a group, the things that make you lightheaded, the things that you can't focus. By breathing yogically in on 4, or Susan's version, in on 4, out on 6, for even 2 or 3 breaths, you bring clarity and focus to what you're doing. You lower your heart rate. You lower your blood pressure. And if you've done this correctly, the next time you take a breath and you go to speak, shoulders lowered, posture, there's more to this. But you're going to speak from your authentic place. And you're going to speak boldly and intentionally, which is something we should all do way more often in our conversations with everyone. Be intentional about what we're saying and how we say it. And when you're being intentional, you're often speaking much more slowly. You have an opportunity to choose better words. You have a responsibility to pause. 2 reasons. 1, it allows you to take another breath and reset that beautiful, big, bold voice. And it also allows your brain to move ahead, maybe into what your next sentence is going to be. But really, a pause is for me, the person you're speaking to. I need to understand. I need to digest what you just said. So a pause allows me to do that. If you're going to go a mile a minute about anything, my eyes will start to glaze over.
Yes.
Or if I'm just saying any words that come to my head without really doing it intentionally, I'm going to be hurtful. I'm going to say things I will probably regret. So we can't all be perfect in this, but we can try. So speaking boldly and intentionally and using breath work as the framework allows you to be a more confident speaker. It allows you to choose better words. It allows you to get your point across exactly the way you want it to get across so that the communicatee has no trouble learning from the communicator. And that in television, it's a 2-dimensional, much like this screen is here on in the podcast, it's two-dimensional, but it's still a conversation, and you still need to connect with the people you're talking with or the person you're interviewing. And then hopefully the people who are listening into that interview are also connecting. It seems like a lot. I mean, I always say to my
Mhm.
clients, we're going to eat an elephant, but we're not going to eat
Right.
it in one bite. We're going to do this in little bits. So you start to develop layers of awareness.
Hmm.
That
Yeah.
was a very long diatribe, Jennifer. I apologize.
No, there were so many things in there
I know.
that are so incredibly important as a speech teacher. Just to be able to take in, one of the things that I talk about in the classroom is the breathing, right? The breath work that we can do to manage those nerves that will appear.
And should appear.
Congratulations, you're human. Yeah. I mean, if you get nervous at the thought of delivering a presentation in front of a group of people, or you get nervous at the thought of going into your boss's office because there is a difficult conversation that you need to have, that's normal to
Yeah.
feel the butterflies, to feel that sense of anxiousness. But in listening to you describe also how your shoulder, because I've always focused on the breath work, but I've never thought to include just physically the
Yeah.
shoulders
Mhm.
and how that has an impact on not only how you're feeling as a part of that ability to calm the system down just a little bit, but it also has that ability to affect the voice and how it's
Mhm.
being delivered. And
Mhm.
you can sound much more in control,
Control.
even if you're not feeling in control at the moment.
Yep.
You're feeling nervous, but
Yep.
just that awareness. And another thing that you said that I think is so important to point out to anyone who is interested in getting into this space and trying to apply these things that we're talking about, this is a work in progress.
Always.
It's not one thing. You're going to do this one thing. You're going to focus on your shoulders and make them heavy. You're going to do your breathing exercises, and you're going to give yourself time to think about the sentence and pause. These are things that take time and practice and consistency.
Mhm.
So don't put so much pressure on
Mm-mm.
yourself to think, well, I'm doing everything that they said. Susan, I'm doing everything.
Give
It's still
yourself
not.
grace. Give yourself grace.
Yes, absolutely. So that's another important thing that I think is a huge takeaway from, and don't call it a diatribe. Every second of what you just offered there is so important. One question that I have, and it comes up in the studies, is because you mentioned the workplace and how this can be an effective tool to use in the workplace. For women specifically, and I know you've read a lot of the studies that connect how women are viewed in the
Oh,
workplace,
yeah.
and it's connected with vocal delivery, the pitch, in the voice, and how it impacts perceptions of whether or
Mhm.
not you are confident, in control versus someone who is overbearing, and that whole
Yep.
situation of women in the workplace and how we use our voice in a
Yep.
professional sense. What are your thoughts on that? What
Oh, do we
Because
have
I
another
can tell
hour?
from your, I know, right? So I can tell from your body language, and your eyes lit up.
Uh-huh.
So
One of my favorite things.
yeah, what do you say to the women you work with in this area?
And I work with, it's probably 75% women, 25% men.
Mm, okay.
And the women come to me because they don't believe they are in control of the pitch of their voice. They don't think
Mm,
they're in control
mm,
of their breath. Got that. Easily we can work
mhm,
on that. However, what I have learned about this, and this will apply to women in the workplace because, hey, a TV or radio station's a workplace. Let's go back to your childhood. Let's go back to when you were a girl and the kind of house you grew up in and the kind of people you grew up with and the kind of expectations that you grew up with. And that can be a variety of things where women particularly have developed a voice that either gets them what they need, gets them what they want, or gets them through a dysfunctional family, a domineering father. As you move into teenage years, how you communicate with your friends, how you communicate with potential dates, and a voice you develop to attract them or repel them, I don't know, but all the voice tones that we use because of expectations get folded into our college years, and then suddenly we're in the workforce. And what I have found is that many women do not use their authentic voice. They never speak in those lower, most of them are lower, pleasant tones because they weren't expected to. I just heard a really interesting podcast about how we travel in 3 spaces. One space is our expertise, and we can address imposter syndrome to that. But our expertise is one space. Our body is our second space. And when you think about what women are expected to do, we just look at fashion. We're expected to take up less space. We're expected to be feminine. We're expected to be small. We're expected to be little. And then there's our voice. That's the third space. Well, we shouldn't sound too bold. We shouldn't raise our voices because then you're going to sound aggressive. There's a difference between assertive and aggressive. Thank you. So what I teach women to do is to access their natural tones from the bottom of their diaphragm to use not only on air, but for many women, they use it in the newsroom or in their lives or in their communication with everybody. And I have had women come back to me with tears in their eyes and have said how healing it is to be able to speak as their bodies will allow them to. When we think of higher, breathy, lighter tones, think about a siren. Think about anything that's associated with danger. It's a high, shrill tone, right?
Right.
When you think about a lower tone, that's something we trust. It's something that calms us. It's something that we believe in. Women just, and I'm not saying we were told point blank to speak X. It just is how it happened. It's just, it's what we did to survive our childhoods. Some of us, not everybody. So I really do suggest to women to go back and, I'm not a psychologist, but go back and unpack a little bit of your childhood and your relationships to people in authority. Now in your business, if you're not in authority, your expertise has at least made you a guide. You have expertise that you share with people. Do it in a way that compliments you the best. We all have those voices. Sometimes in working with my men clients, they develop an uber low tone because they think that's what anchors should sound like.
Right. The baritone.
No. Right. No. So for some, it's almost raising their pitch. I've often worked with sports people going into news, and that's just a whole mindset change and a vocal change as well. And in a way, it takes the stress off them. They just, oh, wow, thanks. I don't have to do this.
Yeah.
So an authentic voice brings out your confidence. It brings out the best in you. Hiding behind a voice that's too shrill or high or breathy, thank you, Kardashian girls,
Right.
doesn't really help you in the works. Whether we like it or not, people are going to judge us by how we sound. If the eyes are the windows to your soul, Your mouth and your voice are the front door.
That's right. That's right.
People
You
will
know,
judge.
I've had a similar conversation um, in the classroom and even outside of the classroom, just with women in general, about the unfairness of being judged by your voice in a
Yep.
professional setting. It's the reality. We all do it. We do it to the men as well. When you think about
Yeah,
it,
we do.
depending
True.
on, you see a man, and when they open their mouth, you have a certain expectation, and if they don't meet that expectation, we know immediately there's some judgment that is happening. Um, but I wanted to ask that question specifically for women in the workspace, because I know it is a challenge that many of us face, and it can be very um, disheartening
Yeah.
when you don't know how to get to that optimum, speaking voice. Because we listen to people talk about, what is that optimum pitch? Like, where should I start? Because I could start anywhere, right? Or I could start lower. Or so how would I be able to find,
All right.
where is that optimum
Sure.
pitch?
And it's all in the breath work.
Mhm,
My advice to everyone who is really serious about um, delving into that authentic voice,
mhm,
once I teach you the breath work, which is posture and breathing in on 4, out on 6, whatever, I want you to take 4 Post-it notes, and you're gonna write on them breath, and then one
mm,
goes on your steering wheel, one on your computer, one on your bathroom mirror, one on your refrigerator. And every
mm,
time during a day you pass the Post-it note, stop. Put yourself into, I would call it the zone. I would teach you how to,
mhm,
align
mhm,
yourself for the zone and breathe for 1 minute. If it's in on 4, out on 6, that's 6 to 7 breaths. That's all I'm asking you to
mhm,
do.
mhm,
Take 6 or 7 breaths and then go on about the rest of your day until the next time you pass a Post-it note. If you do that consistently for 2 to 3 weeks, learning to access that breath, which is always at the bottom of your diaphragm. And so if you've practiced always breathing and speaking from the bottom of your diaphragm, it does become second nature. It's not
mhm.
something you will have to do forever. Some people may
Right.
take a little longer than others. I'll always start with a young woman who really wants to improve the sound of her voice in general. I'll say, start with one person you speak with every day. Back when I
Mhm.
taught college, I would say, and the girls, my mother. Okay, fine.
Right.
Every time you talk to your mother, um, I want you to be conscious of breathing through
Mhm.
through the belly and speaking from that bold and beautiful place. By the third time you do this, your mother is going to ask, what happened to you and what did you do with her? And
Right.
that's the ultimate compliment. So it becomes muscle memory, because literally your
Mhm.
diaphragm is a muscle, and it
Yes.
can become exercised to the point where you can put yourself in a zone like that and
Mhm.
access the beautiful tones of your voice that every single one of us has. Every single
Yes.
one of
Yeah.
us has.
Okay. I've said it a million times. I'll say it again one more time. Communication is a skill, just like any other skill. We have to work at it to get good at it. And it takes time and it takes effort. And so if you're curious about, what I just asked about the right pitch, listen to what Susan just said, focus on that and just repeat it over and over again. I love the idea with the post-it notes. That's
Mhm.
brilliant.
Yeah, my
That's
singing
because
teacher
it
came up with that one.
yeah. That's
Mhm.
awesome. It's that physical reminder, because we do forget throughout the day. We have Lorinda is joining us on LinkedIn, and she says, I need a new voice talking to funeral directors. And she follows up with, many have voices that are manipulators to me. I help families talk to them, even though they are grieving, but they need to get through. Okay, so they need help too. So I'm guessing
Oh.
the question, can a person get a new voice? This is an interesting question, because I know Lorinda, with working in the grief space and helping families with their
What a
grieving.
wonderful idea.
Yeah, yeah. And to think about this reminds me of what you said earlier, Susan, about when we think about growing up and the different aspects of the voice that we use in our families. And it made me think mothers, when we try to calm down our babies. And I remember when I would hold, my babies, I have a son and a daughter, and they were just having that moment. And I would cuddle them and in low tones, it's okay.
Yep.
It'll be fine.
Yep.
Kind of like you were saying with the shrieking, that just makes everything that much worse. But then the focusing on low tones, less calm, and all of that. Do you think there's something to that would, I guess, translate to the question that Lorinda is asking about adopting a certain type of voice in that area that she works in, working with funeral directors and families who are grieving?
Adopting a different kind of voice. See, I
Mhm.
hesitate to use the word different.
Mm,
I would
mm.
just simply use the word authentic.
Okay. Okay.
And I think everybody should use our authentic voices to whomever we're speaking with. But when you're
Mm,
talking about speaking to grieving families or funeral directors, when nobody is, well, the funeral directors probably aren't scattered, but
mhm,
nobody in the throes of grief is thinking clearly or rationally
mhm,
sometimes. I think it's almost how you would speak if you're an oncologist and you need to make a
mhm,
patient understand some very
mm,
difficult information.
mhm,
Um, saying it with compassion, speaking with
mhm,
empathy, speaking slowly, allowing the other person to react or to ask a question. Um, my husband died by suicide 8 years ago.
mm,
And coming out of that, for months, when I spoke with bankers or financial people or other people in my life who were trying to help, it was almost as though I were four. You needed to tell me it
mm,
900 times or
mm,
rephrase it another way. And I tried never to be by myself. There was always
mhm,
somebody else there listening so that somebody else could explain it to me again, because you don't retain that information when you're in that kind of grieving space. So I just think the connection, eye
mhm,
contact, um, making sure if a funeral director isn't glossing over or isn't running past whatever your ideas are, whatever you need from him or her
mhm,
right at this moment. If
mhm,
you're advocating for a family to a funeral director,
mhm,
we're really speaking from a very authentic, bold place where you are not
mhm.
afraid of it and you are explaining what you need and you need it now, kind of
Right.
thing, and you're
Yeah.
not gonna take no from an answer for an answer. So, um, what a very special gift Lorinda must have
Mhm,
if she's
mhm,
helping these people. But empathy and compassion and connection is also one of the layers
mhm.
we all need to have with whomever we're speaking to.
Right.
And um, it's clear that all of us can use more of it, because
Mhm,
information and conversation, and we can listen to a million podcasts a day and we can get
mhm,
different points of view and we can watch all the CNN or Fox or C-SPAN we want to collect all the information we think we need. It's a lot.
mhm.
And we need time to process it. That's the kind of interesting thing that's happened over the last 50 years, is that there's just so much more information um,
Right.
that is now two-way. Didn't used to
Mm,
be two-way. Used to be the funeral director told you what you were going to do and you would do this and you would be here and here's how it's going to go.
that's
No, not
yeah,
so much.
yeah.
We
Mhm.
have more agency in
Mm.
our communications every which way to Sunday. So um, we need to make sure we use them appropriately and often.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's wonderful because one of the things that, she was asking was, can a person get a new voice? And I think you answered that as you were talking, not necessarily a new voice, but
Mm-mm.
just tapping into
Uncovering
your yeah, mhm,
uncovering
mhm.
what's been there and you just didn't know it.
That's right,
Yeah.
that's right.
And that's what
And
women have found so healing. They didn't know it was
right.
there.
Yeah, yeah. She says, "Ma'am, I could write a book." And I bet you could, Lorinda, and you
And
should
you
write that
should.
book.
Yeah, grief and dying is a thing we hide behind, shy away from, we turn
Mhm.
away from. No, it needs to be front and center, and we need books, and we need podcasts, and we need
Yeah.
to make it part of mainstream conversation.
Wow. Yeah, yeah. And I just wanna take a moment, Susan, to recognize that you just shared something incredibly personal, something that it would be a nightmare uh, to have to live through that
It was.
experience,
It was.
and wow, just the ability for you to want to share that with listeners
I
and for
don't
them to
usually, that's for sure,
yeah.
Jennifer. It's the only time it's ever come up, but I think because of what
Mhm.
Lorinda does, it obviously
Right.
struck a chord with me.
Yeah.
Um, so it's but I also think too, when you've lived 65 plus years, that sometimes sharing seems easier. If this had
Mm,
happened to
mhm,
me, I was 57 when my husband died. If I had been 37,
mm,
I probably would hide it. I would bury it.
mhm.
Not true now.
Yeah, yeah.
You see the
One of
value in that as you get
yeah.
older.
Yeah, because there's so many people who are able to connect with that, as you were telling that story, I can imagine there's somebody out there who will listen to this later on, and they'll be able to get something
Yeah.
out of that, something that's very comforting, out of that. One of the things that you had mentioned, and again, it made me think of in a variety of different situations, you had mentioned going into like the bank or when you're having to deal with anybody else and the types of voices that they would use when they were talking to you, almost as if, okay, I need to be very careful with this individual. So I'm going to talk as if maybe I'm talking as if I'm talking to a child or,
Mm.
you know, um, did that, are there any lessons learned for others who may be in that position again? Is there anything that you would tell them that was not helpful or helpful in that moment for you as the person who was in that vulnerable position and how they were using their voices?
I think everyone is different and everyone needs
Mm,
a
mhm,
different approach.
mm,
Um, my financial advisor, uh, just he was just constantly strong and just kept moving, and I'd be sobbing, and he
mm,
just he verbally and I don't know how to put it, he just never let go. He was
mhm,
just constantly moving, whereas the bankers, they were women.
mhm,
And I sent them flowers when I moved away because I could not have negotiated any of all of that 18 months later when I moved. But I appreciated their tenderness. I appreciated
mm, mhm.
they realized I was a deer in headlights. They
Yeah.
realized they had to get past a whole bunch of pain before they could
Mm,
get me to understand how to close an account or what this required now that my husband had passed. I mean,
mhm,
so and every approach, no matter who it was, I took it and used it. I
mhm,
never said, "Oh, stop treating me like that." I never said, "No, that's not what I want." I wonder if
mhm,
some people I would hope that if that wasn't what you would wanted, that you would have spoken up.
mhm, mhm.
I never found that to be an issue, but I could see where it would be with some people.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
gotta kid gloves, eggshells, all those analogies.
Right. Yeah. It just makes me think of, I was diagnosed with breast cancer in October of 2017. And so when you had mentioned, the voice that an oncologist might use when they're delivering
Of
bad
course.
news. And then Lorinda, came in and talking about the voices that, maybe she could use, or the voice that she could use when she's dealing with funeral directors versus, dealing with families. Um, whether you need to go and if you're an HR director. And I had a fantastic conversation with another guest where she works with organizations, specifically managers, how to uh, work more effectively with employees who have been diagnosed with cancer or some type of you know, um, a
Right.
terrible illness. And so it's just really interesting to think about in the work that you do, how it really does touch so many facets of our lives, not just professionally, but personally. And just to tune into when you say your authentic voice, it's making me think that you could have, depending on the situation, depending on just being tuned into that other person and focusing on what their needs are at the time, that authentic voice, it could be different. It could be a little more of that higher pitch, sing songy, I want to kind of take care of you right now because I'm feeling very motherly, you know,
Mm.
in some instances. In other instances, maybe it could be the more assertive type of in control, this is how it needs to be done, don't worry about this, type of vocal delivery. I don't know. It's just kind of all of my synapses in the brain are firing off
Right.
now, making all of these connections. And it's
But it
just
all
an
comes from the
interesting
same place.
conversation.
It
Yeah.
all comes
Yeah.
from real.
Yeah.
And if
Yes.
you're not being real, you
Mhm.
don't have to pay attention to the conversation that's coming at you. You can
Yes.
just keep on
Yes.
with your conversation. But if you're being real, you've tuned into that conversation that's coming your
Yes.
way, and you're going to react to it with authenticity. And if it's
Mhm.
taking control and
Mhm.
just becoming bigger in the room, or whether it's slowing it down and the shorter sentences and let's take this a little bit at a time, it's still all from the same place, or should be.
Right. Yeah. And it all goes back to that beginning where you said, focus on your shoulders, do the
Yes.
breath work, center
Right.
yourself. It's like,
Right. Exactly.
get in
Exactly.
that zone, like you were saying.
Yep.
Yeah, that's so incredibly important. And I think that is something that, regardless of the situation that we're in, just come back to that moment and let that be your guide.
Exactly. Good point. Let the
Mm,
moment be your guide. Love it. Love it.
yeah. Is there any we've been going for 58 minutes now. We're almost to the hour. Can you believe it?
Oh my gosh. Feels like
I
10
know,
minutes.
right? We could
How do
just
we do
keep
this?
going on forever. This is such a fun conversation, and I've gotten so much out of this conversation. I didn't even have a chance to ask you about your business that you created, your company that you created. So can you say a little bit about your company, what you're doing with it, anybody who is interested in doing this type of work,
Sure.
how do they contact you, all of those things?
Well, my little service is called VOSOT, Better Broadcast Voices. VOSOT, VOSOT, which is broadcast shorthand for voiceover, sound on tape. It's when an anchor reads a story. She didn't write it, the reporter who covered the story did, but she wrote it for the anchor, and it might include a cut from somebody at the story. So that's voiceover, sound on tape,
Mhm.
which, thinking that I would be working primarily with broadcasters, if you know what VOSOT means, haha, it's
Mhm.
cute.
Mhm.
But now, whether I work with speakers or students, VOSOT, now you know a little bit of broadcast shorthand. So it's SusanMurphyVOSOT.com is my website. And you can also find me at LinkedIn. Just Google, not Google, but go to LinkedIn, Susan Murphy Voice Coach. There are a lot of Susan Murphys on LinkedIn. So it's easy to find me. Easy to find me.
That's awesome, and I'll make sure to have all of that information in the show notes
Thank
for
you.
anyone
Great.
who really wants to be able to contact you. A couple of last and final thoughts, Lorinda says that she is going to prepare herself. So she's going to try the things that we've been talking about.
Great.
And she's good. Yes, yes, you are correct, Lorinda. Susan is good. She's great.
I've been doing it a long time. That's all. But I find, yes, I get paid for what I do. But to be honest with you, the psychological income, like teaching, you know this, Jennifer, to
Mhm.
watch the light bulbs go on, to watch
Oh,
the
yeah.
confidence bloom. Oh, come on. That's priceless.
Oh yeah, that's the most fulfilling thing
Mm,
ever when you know that you have been able to help someone
mm,
get to a place where
yes.
they feel like, "Man, I
Yes.
got this now. I got this." You can let go.
Yes.
I got
Yes.
this, right?
Right. You
That's the
wanna
most
make yourself
wonderful thing.
obsolete. You don't need me
Mhm.
anymore. Yeah,
That's right.
right.
Thank you again, Susan. This has
Jennifer, what a
been
delight.
wonderful. Yeah, I've so enjoyed this conversation. I don't want it to end, so we'll figure out a way to get together again
There are
at
more
some
rabbit
point.
holes we can go down. There are more areas we can discuss. I'll be back anytime.
Oh, yeah, there are so many avenues I wanna go down with
Yes,
you, so,
I'm
I'm gonna have
in.
to write down my notes, and we'll save it and do this again so that we
Love
can go
to.
down all those different rabbit holes. Alright, everyone, that is it for today's edition of Communication 24/7. I hope you enjoyed it, I know I did. This will be released again in the audio format in a few weeks. So if you missed it today, stay tuned for that release. It'll be going out. And of course, I'll let everybody know when that goes out again. So I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your Monday. Happy Monday. Hope this was a great way to begin it. Have a great rest of your week. And just remember, take care of yourselves.
Mhm.
Communication, keep practicing it. It is a skill, and we're all a work in progress. All right. Catch everybody later. Bye.